Next, we'll take a look at the actual selection tools for the guides. The first is the live selection, and this is much like the live selection that is intrinsic to Cinema 4D, except this one only works with the hair. If we take a look at the attributes for this live selection tool, you'll see that we have a radius option. So if we take a look at the viewport there, you'll see that white circle is the current radius. If we increase this, you'll see that it increases the size of that circle. So anything that is within that circle is going to be selected when I click and drag. The next option that we have is visible only. And in this case, all of my hair is visible to me. But in a situation where the hair might be behind another object, if visible only is checked, and I click and drag, the hairs that are behind that object will not be selected. If I want to get all the hairs, then I want to make sure that visible only is unchecked. And in that case, when I make my selection, it will select all of the guides that I can see, as well as any of the guides that are hiding behind this object. So I'll just check that back on. The next option is restrict. And this one is going to work in conjunction with a polygon selection. So if I go to my pelt object, you'll see that I have a set of polygons selected here. If I go back to the hair object, choose live selection, and enable restrict, and then try to select things, you'll notice that it only selects the guides that are touching or adjacent to the polygon selection that I had created. So we'll uncheck restrict. The next option is select locked. Now, if I select some hairs, you'll see that in the selection menu here, I do have an option to lock selected. When I do this, the hairs turn a darker blue, and they are no longer available to be selected. Now, I could simply unlock all, which will unlock the hairs. We'll just undo there. Or I could force the tool to work with these locked hairs. So select locked, checked, means that I can now select the guides that I had locked. So we'll just uncheck that and unlock all again. The next options that we have here are some shape options for controlling the shape of the brush. The default is circle. We can choose box or diamond. Adjusting the aspect is going to change the direction or kind of the amount that these brushes are squashed. So a diamond with an aspect of 180% here is going to be a little bit more like a squash diamond. If I put that in the other direction, you'll see that it squashes in the opposite direction here. Same thing with the circle and with the box. We'll set this back to 100% and circle. The next option is pressure. Now this is going to relate to pen pressure. It will also allow you to change the size or the radius of your live selection depending on how hard you press. If I set this to radius, you'll see that varying the pressure on my tablet is going to change the radius of the live selection tool. Let's set that back to none. The other option here is angle, and this one is going to set an angle for your brush. Now, you're not going to notice this when the aspect ratio is 100%, but if we set the aspect ratio to something a lot larger, like 300%, you'll see that 90 degrees has the circle standing on end. Setting this back to 0 has it lying flat again. I can choose a value in between to get an angled circle as well. I next have options for rectangle selection, polygon selection, and lasso selection. We'll take a look at the rectangle selection here. First of all, the attributes that you have access to are definitely reduced from the live selection. And this is because the rectangle selection only wants you to click and drag, and you get to specify all the different size options that you need while dragging. So anything that is found within that rectangle marquee that was displayed there is going to be selected. Now this does have some similar options. Visible only is going to control whether tips or guides that are not currently visible to the camera are selected as well. The restriction option is going to use that same polygon selection, so even if I click and drag to encompass a lot more points, it's only selecting the ones associated with the polygon selection in my pelt. And then select locked is going to allow me to select those guides that I may have locked again. So you'll see trying to select these does not work unless I check select locked. And at that point I can now select the locked guides. polygon selection has the exact same options as the rectangle selection, except with the polygon, you can click from point to point to point, and then finally on your starting point again to select any points within that area. Again, if guides are locked, they will not be selected. So we'll just unlock all, and we'll go again. So point to point to point to point to point, and then to the beginning again, and that selects all those guides within there. The lasso selection is a little bit easier. You just click and drag, and anything within the shape that you create is going to be selected. The select hidden command is going to allow me to select points that I cannot see. So in this case, I have a couple of hairs that are bent, and the points are on the underside of the surface. When I'm in my selection tools here, like say the live selection, visible only is checked. So if I am brushing along to try and get a selection there, it's not going to select those bottom points. If I uncheck visible only, I can go ahead and do the selection again, and you'll see that it does get those bottom points again. But let's say that I want to get everything that is not currently in my viewport or that I can't see. I can choose Select Hidden. Now, if we zoom out a little bit, you'll see that it selects all of the hairs that were outside of the viewport, as well as those hairs that are contained within the surface. So this command is useful if you need a catch-all, or something that's just going to grab everything that you can't see. The selection tool is going to allow you to select guides based off of different selection rules. So the first thing you have is a mode, and this is going to tell Cinema how it should be dealing with the selection. So if anything matches these rules, it will get a new selection. If it's set to add, if anything matches these rules, the selection will be added to the current selection in the viewport. And if it's set to subtract, anything that matches these rules is going to be subtracted from the current selection in the viewport. Okay, so let's take a look at the rules themselves. So in this case, you'll see that there are some unrooted hairs on the pelt object. And this is signified by the little green circle at the root of the hair. Now in my selection tool, I have the mode set to new, so I'm going to create a new selection. And I'm going to select unrooted hairs. So if I click Apply, you'll see that it only selects the hairs that I have that are unrooted. If I choose Invert, it's going to give me the inverse of the selection that I originally had. So I'll set this back to invert there. I'm going to go back to the live selection, and I'm going to select some other hairs here. Go back to the selection tool, and this time under the mode I'm going to select Add, and I'm still going to choose Unrooted. I'll click Apply. You'll see this time it keeps the original selection I had while it adds the unrooted guides to my selection. Finally, I can choose Subtract, and it's going to remove just those unrooted hairs from the selection that I had. The next option that I have is Select Intersecting. Now, you'll see that I don't have any hairs currently selected, but if I click Apply on Intersecting, what it's going to do is select all of the guides that are intersecting the surface that the guides are grown from. So in this case, it only selects the two guides that are going below the pelt's surface. The final selection rule is 0. Now sometimes when you're editing your hair, you can get into a situation where the guide itself or the hairs are more or less 0. They don't have any size. So in this case, you'll see that there are a couple guides missing, and they're not actually missing. If I use the live selection tool, you'll see that there are still selectable vertices there. So they do exist in the scene, but they don't have any length. So in case you want to grab all of these, you can go to the selection tool, and let's just clear the selection first, and then set the select mode to 0. If you click Apply, this is going to select all of those guides that have a 0 length.